You come to me with this problem now in your hands, when I have filled my cheeks with all of the sunflower seeds throughout Sicily to create chipmunk cheeks, and you dare to bring to me this problem of your own simping. How dare you? How dare you? What you need is chalk.com.
As you all know, The Godfather is considered one of the best films of all time. The second one also won many awards and is highly acclaimed. Many critique the third one. I don't think it's that bad if you look at it from the perspective of insights into big geopolitical moves, games, etc. So it's very instructive and insightful. And because of that, my buddy Frank and I were going to be covering the entire book. We're going to go throughout the entire text just like we went through the entirety of Brave New World in our recent breakdown. I think we did 5 hours on that. But I wanted to invite you as well to our chat, our literary breakdown, geopolitical conspiracy symbolism breakdown of the novel itself, one of the preeminent, most famous novels of the 20th century by Mario Puzo. And if you don't know, the novel is actually based on a conglomeration of many actual historical figures. Some of those figures, I didn't interview those figures, but I have been, as you know, interviewing and chatting with Sammy the Bull Gravano. And Sammy, of course, is famous for being the underboss to John Gotti. This is a great book that goes into the history, by the way, of the Sicilian Mafia and the Mafia in the United States. And what we're going to see is that a lot of the characters in The Godfather kind of match up to not so much more recent figures like Gotti or Sammy the Bull, but older era figures like Carlo Gambino seems to play a pretty key role for the figure of Don Corleone, Marlon Brando's character. And then we see other figures as well kind of melded into the figure of Michael Corleone, the successor to the Corleone family. The Godfather is amazing, not just as a literary novel, but also or as a literary piece, but also because of its insights into geopolitics and a lot of the material that we discuss over on this channel. So if you followed my work for a long time, you know years ago we talked about The Godfather, and I actually honed in on part 3 of the films because part 3 talks about P2, the fascist mafia lodges throughout Italy that were recruited by Kissinger and the CIA to be part of Operation Gladio, to be involved in a lot of shady things to stave off a potential Soviet invasion by Stalin of Europe. That included a lot of black ops and things that you probably can't talk about on soft YouTube here. But it also included funding from the OSS and CIA DRUG lanes. And that's detailed in a lot of the books that we've covered. That all ties into The Godfather. Because as you know, perhaps if you have watched the films, but it's also in the book, the hit on Don Corleone relates to his rejection of the offer to join in with some of the other 5 big mafia families to run heroin into the United States at that time. And so because he doesn't want to do that, this becomes a chief catalyst in the novel's plot for the ensuing mafia war that takes place. Again, a lot of this based on real historical events. And, you know, I would, again, suggest go listen to the interviews that we've done with the chats that we've done with Sammy the Bull. Some of that's over at his paywall at our thing. And a lot of that's over on his channel. A lot of that will eventually, by the way, be made public. So the interviews that we've done will eventually be there, hopefully. We also have one that we did with Lord Voldemort. But aside from the geopolitical and literary, there's also the secret society element that's very evident in the novel. When you watch the movie, you don't really get the impression that there's a lot of religious symbolism or there's a lot of theological imagery. It's a lot more prevalent in the novel. The title should tell you, right? The Godfather. He is a kind of alternate church figure. He's the churchy figure, the dark Godfather, you could say, a dark patriarch figure that you go to when the institutional outlets have failed you. And this was a real experience of many immigrants in the United States when they came over from other countries. They couldn't necessarily find justice in the somewhat corrupt, I guess you could say, justice system and the even more corrupt police system of that time. And so they would have to turn to alternate means of how to find justice, and that's the role that the Don plays for many people. The Don also, however, has his foot not just in trying to procure justice for his people, for the Sicilians and the Italians in America, the immigrants, but also rackets, also illegal forms of making money and avoiding taxes. But again, that has to do with what a lot of immigrants felt forced into. And so the history of the mafia, actually, if you read Selwyn Robb's book, or if you read the Davis book, actually goes back to older sort of militia and libertarian groups that were trained to basically defend the islands, the Italian islands, against invaders. And this eventually evolved into local sort of warlords, you could say, but there were warlords that had a code, sort of like the Pirates Code in the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? So in the same way that the model of a power structure within a power structure is copied when you think of the mafia in the United States, because it's an alternate power structure. It's a corporation within the United States, an organization within the United States that's not just corporate. In fact, it's more like a secret society, as Sammy has often explained in our interviews, because the omerta and the rituals were actually sort of born out of both Catholic ideas and Freemasonic ideas. Some of the early Sicilian mafia figures in the time of the Italian Revolution, like Garibaldi, they were actually Freemasons and involved in all kinds of liberation plots and the attempt to basically give independence to Sicily, if I recall, right? So they wanted independence. The Sicilians saw themselves as really the essence of high Italian culture, and the rest of Italy and Europe was kind of barbaric. And so they saw this as their inheritance, their lineage, their tradition. Another thing we noticed too in the novel is that bloodlines are very important. And in the interviews that we've done with Sammy and the talks that he's done, he emphasizes this point that, a full-blooded Sicilian is the only person really allowed to have any positions of power in the mafia. There might be consiglières, or there might be people who are consultants or lawyers, or people like Tom Hagen in the novel. But to actually be in positions of power requires full-blooded Sicilian succession, and that's because of the power and the old traditions of the importance of your lineage, your heritage, your bloodline. So even before the discovery of genetics and epigenetics, genetic memories and all of that, you have this very traditional notion that bloodlines are very important. And that's not just in Europe or in the UK or Burke's Peerage or at some giant Mormon genealogy library. This is a tradition from the ancient and medieval world, and it survives in the ideology and tradition of the Sicilian mafia. Other mafias also have the same patterns and same ideas, but the Sicilian is definitely one of the oldest. I believe this ties into the history of Renaissance Italy very clearly with some of the powerful families and figures there. It also ties into the Vatican and a lot of the history of and intrigues of the Vatican that many people don't know. But we've actually gone into some of that, particularly as it's come to the fore in 20th century geopolitics in regard to Gladio and the P2. And the Williams book that we lectured through, right, covers that in great detail. So another key point, though, in the novel is the direct connection between the organized crime structure and, if you didn't notice it, it's actually hinted at twice in the novel, the Pentagon and the power structure of the deep state. The FBI, Hoover, people from the Pentagon are very closely allied with the movie director, who is explicitly said to be a PEDO. So Mario Puzo, in his novel back in 1969, was telling us all the stuff that we're learning and talking about in mainstream media today. It's all actually in the novel if you pay attention. Organized crime figures are directly connected to people in the Pentagon. People in the Pentagon are directly connected to people in Hollywood, the biggest producers in Hollywood, who are said to film propaganda films for the White House. So everything that I talk about and that we've really stressed and written about in my books, lectured about, is contained oftentimes in a much more powerful and impactful way in fiction stories. For example, remember how when we covered C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, we saw that the third volume of the Space Trilogy was really all about Tavistock, technocracy. Aliens are basically demons or fake and gray. They're not just fake and gray, they're fake and gray demons, bro. And that's in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy novel. And so by merely reading literary works, and you can get the same principle from movies, this is a point that we've made about how films actually tell us a lot more reality than the news does. Movies actually are a quicker, more powerful form of art, I guess you could say, than novels are. But novels also have that ability as well to really encapsulate and bring in not just the geopolitical conspiracy and symbolic elements. Because, for example, as I said, people confess to the Godfather like he's a confessor, like a priest. But it also can bring in the psychology of human motivations. And we don't really get that in factual news articles, right? But when we have great works of literature, such as Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare was a master of human psychology and putting that into stories and what actually motivates humans in their actions, as well as Dostoevsky, master psychologist. In the same way, Mario Puzo's novel has that high level of human psychological insight to really show us not just how humans operate, but what really motivates all the human virtues and vices, our drives, our desires, and the effects that virtues and vice have on our lives. It's also a critique of Americanism and whether the philosophy of Americanism is actually destructive to older notions of heritage and tradition. America as the propositional nation is a central conflict throughout the novel, as Michael has to contend with whether he wants to go to war and teach in college, or does he want to become the successor to Don Corleone in this Sicilian empire that he's organized crime empire that he's inherited. So it's a tough choice that Michael has to make. His wife also plays a role in that. She wants him to not be a part of that enterprise, and so she stands for and represents Americanism. Americanism is even mentioned in the book, right? Especially with the early character of Amerigo. His name itself suggests where his allegiance lies. And early on, there's that tension between him and the Don because he's chosen the American legal system rather than relying on Don Corleone. So it's a fascinating novel, but it's mostly important for its insights into not just human psychology and action, but the reality of how the world really works in terms of geopolitics, politics, Americanism, power structures, corruption, organized crime, intelligence agencies, Hollywood. It's all in this masterful novel. And if you subscribe to my members site, you'll have access to that every week as Frank and I work through the entirety of the book for the next 4 weeks, the next month. We'll be doing the first 100 pages this Monday. And then successive Mondays, we'll do the other chapters or sections. But it'll always be available at my website for the members. So you can go ahead and subscribe now to the members site or to my Rockfin, and you'll get access to the full breakdown and literary analysis. And we'll tie it into a lot of historical events as well. Also, if you want to boost your testosterone and not be like Johnny Fontaine, who's simping at the beginning of the movie to Don Corleone, if you want that toxic Don Corleone energy, head on over to chalk.com and use the promo code J50 to get 50% off all those great products over there, the best adaptogens to make up for our nutrient deficient diets. The promo code is JAY50, J50, 50% off all those products right now at chalk.com.